Hey everybody, Greg here, and this is a short video comparison between the Moto G6 and the Moto X, two smartphones, Android phones from Motorola. This year, both models are still considered new. There isn't a replacement out yet, but we're expecting a new, Moto X, presumably 5, and then a Moto G7 at some point. I went ahead and got the Moto G6. There was a special on that. The price in the past for Moto G phones has been around $180 on Amazon. It's bumped up now to about $200 if you get it on sale. And the Moto G6, let me just show you that real quick, is a pretty impressive Android phone for the price. It has a nice screen, very slim design, and really feels like a mid-range phone rather than a low-end phone, which is what it's considered to be. And then by comparison, here is the Moto X4. So the phones look pretty identical in size and appearance, assuming you order the black. And only when you look closer do you see some differences. So without turning the screens on yet, let me just show you a close-up here. There's a very slim fingerprint button on the Moto G6. That, for some people, they'll like that. It does seem to work pretty responsively. You tap on it and it opens up, although sometimes it has a little trouble reading. The Moto X4 has a larger, you can see it there, I'll get the light just right. So comparing those two, let me give you the close-up. There you can see sort of a slim fingerprint reader under the Motorola logo there. So yeah, in general, the Moto X4 does have a faster response time and more reliability, it seems like, with the fingerprint reader, but not by much. In the past, the Moto G has had stereo sound. It has had speaker on the top and the bottom, left and right essentially. And that was kind of cool for music and for videos. That's no longer available here. So both phones have a microphone, small microphone port or hole at the bottom. The branding is a little different. On the X, it says Moto at the top. Here on the G, it says Motorola at the bottom. Some people have complained about the branding on the front. I don't know, doesn't bother me. One thing that did sort of jump out at me initially is with the Moto G, you see its surface, on the front, it's black, which is consistent with the design. You'll notice right away with the Moto X, there's this little white dot in the upper, left corner there. And that's the flash unit for doing selfies. So I guess it's nice having a flash on that side of the phone facing you, but it does kind of stand out in appearance. So here are the big factors for me that were kind of deal breakers. One last thing as far as comparison, I'll show you the screens on these. The G6 is quite a bit bigger and there's less of a bezel. So the G6 definitely looks more like an updated modern design phone. The X4 still has maybe a ½ inch bezel at the top and the bottom. I don't really care about that. I'd almost prefer to have someplace to grip a device, tablet or phone, where I can hold on to the thing without accidentally pushing some icon. These new bezel-less devices I think are going to be a fad for that reason. It just creates a problem when you're just trying to hold the device. Okay, so now for the deal breakers. Oh, one more thing, sorry. FM radio. It's kind of neat to have FM radio capability in these devices. So both the G and the X have that. All right, so what I noticed when I was looking at the screen of the Moto G6 is that, when you're a little bit off axis, to me it seemed like it was harder to read. It wasn't as clear. There was a little more glare and less clarity of the text. And also there was a lot more blue light. And I did try the night shift mode, but the blue light can get kind of irritating after an extended period of time. So even without going into night shift on the Moto X, it's really a lot easier to look at for a sustained period of time. So the display is a big step up. The other thing was, I just assumed that at this point, most smartphones, Android or Apple, would have the ability to use a pay in the store, pay at the register feature. The Moto G6 does not have that. It doesn't have near field communication built in, but the Moto X4 does. So between those two factors, for me, it was a clear choice, going with the Moto X4, and at basically the same price. Some other pluses that I discovered later were that the Moto X, when using a Google Fi chip, it will give you really good reception. And something I'm seeing on the Moto X that I'm not seeing on the Moto G6 is built-in VPN, that the Google Fi network is automatically incorporating a VPN in your cellular data types of calls or connections, as well as through Wi-Fi. So that's a plus for people who had been, paying some random third party for VPN service. It's nice to have that built in. And then presumably if you're using the data, cellular data, and you have devices tethered, laptop, computer, or what have you, that would also be benefiting from the VPN connection to the internet. So those are, I guess, the main observations. I'm going to send this G6 back. Now, Motorola was really nice. I got onto a chat session, very responsive. I explained that I'm buying a different phone, and there was no problem. They actually provided a FedEx prepaid shipping label, so I'm really out of pocket, nothing, no cost, no money lost on that. So I really appreciated that. Now, the original Moto G6 was a replacement for my Moto G3, which I had used for about 3 years and was just basically upgrading. I like to stay current with Android to be able to support it better. And I explained that I was not going to be getting my Moto X through Motorola directly. This was an offer that came from Motorola. The Moto X I went ahead and got through Google Fi's online offering. And if you want to check that out, it's fi.google.com. And you can find out about Google's nationwide network, which essentially relies on T-Mobile and I presume towers that are being maintained by Verizon and AT&T. Wherever you go, it switches to what is the best network available, and it also can automatically identify millions of Wi-Fi hotspots and log you in automatically, so you're not always using a data plan. You'd be using Wi-Fi at that point. As far as battery life, to compare these to the iPhone that I've been using, these tend to go for like 2 or 3 days. Now, granted, I'm not using that as my primary device, but I'm picking it up quite a bit. And so I'm impressed with that. The by comparison, phone that I'm using is my primary phone is an iPhone X, so iPhone 10 from 2017. I didn't upgrade in 2018. I didn't see much advantage to it. After a few years of having oversized phones, last year I switched down to a smaller phone, to the basic 10 instead of the 10 Plus or the 8 Plus. And I really like the smaller phone. It's easier to just work with one finger, with your thumb. If you're holding a bag or something, it's nice to be able to just pick it up, answer calls, and do pretty much everything you'd want to do just with one hand. So I do like that, and that's what I was looking for also in replacing the Moto G. I wanted something like the Moto G, that it was pretty small, and the X is nice. It's not much difference, maybe 1/4 of an inch between the G6 and the X4. So, but yeah, the X4, I will say, it feels a lot more solid. They both have what looks like a Gorilla Glass back to them. The finish on the X is a little nicer. And the camera design is similar, although the camera on the X is noticeably better, and it does have some pretty cool features. But then where the G seems to have kind of a plastic feel to it, this is definitely a nice aluminum rounded edges, on the Moto X, which feels really good in the hand. And there are some sort of sharp, seemingly unfinished edges on the G. Not too bad, but you know, it's not as smooth as it could have been. And when I say unfinished, I guess I just mean untapered or unrounded or whatever. They're just sort of some sharp edges, particularly here on the back. It just kind of, you can hear my fingernail catching on the edge there, whereas here on the X it's just smooth. All right, that's about it. I wanted to do this quick video just because, you know, since I'm getting ready to send the G6 back, this would be my last chance to kind of look at it and give you a quick review. So if you have any questions, oh, one other thing, not a big deal, but for me, I have pretty big hands, and my thumb on the G, I like the fact that my thumb just naturally falls right on the power button. So it's quick and easy to turn that on. With the X, when I grab that, my thumb is falling on the high, you know, the volume up button. And I have to move it down a little bit to get to volume down. And then the on button, it's a little awkward. I just have to hold the phone differently. So not a big deal, because usually I would be turning the phone on just by touching it with my thumb and using the fingerprint reader. So yeah, I think that's about it. Oh, one more thing. Sorry, this is kind of a rambling video, but on the Moto G6, when I got it, I went ahead and, you know, did whatever updates were available and took it all the way up to the latest version of Android 8 Oreo. And there were a few updates. It came with 8 though. I think it shipped with 8. The Moto X4 shipped with Android 7. So I had read that it would go up to Android 9 Pie, which is the latest version of Android. It was another sort of deal breaker for me where, you know, I really wanted to have the latest version of Android so I could support the latest version of Android for people who have that, and I can look at my phone and it'll be, you know, similar to what they have. And you can always work back from there to kind of figure out, okay, what would previous versions have had or whatever. So yeah, I was unable to get the Moto G6 to upgrade beyond 8. It just did not have any updates available that were available for release. It just said, nope, you have the current version. So when I got the X4, I was kind of surprised that it came with 7. You know, why wouldn't it come with 8 or 9, which is current? So it came with 7, and at some point I'll have to share the screenshots, but it was like 200 screenshots that I did of every step along the way doing the updates from 7 to, you know, 7.1, etc., you know, every little step. And I think with 8 there were monthly updates, and there did not seem to be a cumulative bundle update available. So it wasn't possible to just do one update and it would get you all the way up to present. So that took a while. That took like pretty much an entire day of, you know, checking the phone and clicking update and going on to something else and continuing to check back. But eventually, yeah, it came up with, on the Moto X4, Android Pie. And that's kind of cool because there are some features in there that make it pretty similar to an iPhone as far as like it has a night mode and some other things like that for basic UI. And, you know, comparing this with the iPhone, just quickly, I would say, you know, it is nice having an FM radio built in. The weather feature is just a tap away and you get to some really nice weather, including the feels like and some slidable, you know, indicators for precipitation and temperature throughout the day. And it's a nice interface. So I would say it's similar in the way that like Bing, for example, gives you a nice interface to weather and some other things that aren't available easily or nicely or as well presented with the weatherchannel.com or with Google. So and the longer battery life, I think, is nice. I think I might grab this device if I'm wanting to check on something and not want to, you know, continue to drain my battery on the iPhone. And finally, with Verizon and AT&T and some of the major networks across the country, you've heard and probably learned that Verizon has pretty good coverage, particularly for phone calls. If you're out in the middle of the Badlands in South Dakota or something, you might still be able to get a Verizon signal, and Sprint isn't as good or AT&T isn't as good. So something about the Google Fi network is that it really seems to have some very good coverage. As an example, I was south of Iowa City in horse and buggy country, in Amish country down near Kelowna, Iowa, and the signal on my AT&T iPhone was just 1 bar, and then it would just drop out. And the 1 bar was either 3G or no G, or it was like 1 bar of voice but no data. So that was kind of a bummer. You're always, especially when you're out in a rural area, that's when you want to use your map or something. So I was impressed with Google Fi's ability to deliver a really good data connection in areas where AT&T is completely absent. So that's impressive. And if a person is, again, I mentioned earlier, using data tethering with your mobile device, it's essential to have a good data connection. It seems that Google is able to achieve this wider coverage by going with lesser networks, probably less in-demand networks, legacy networks that are out there. There were some times where I was getting a 3G network with the Google Fi, or getting 4G, and often it's LTE, but in these areas where maybe there isn't LTE coverage or maybe there isn't even 4G coverage, you can get 3G and data, and that's okay for a little bit of web use and getting some emails and that kind of thing, and certainly for making phone calls. So if you have any questions about any of these devices, particularly the ones that I'm going to be continuing to use on an ongoing basis, the iPhone X 2017 version and the Moto X4, let me know, and I'd be happy to answer those either in the comments on YouTube, if that's where you're watching this, or on whatever web page you're finding this video. On some of my websites, I'll put it there, and I'll be happy to follow up with an answer, or maybe with a video if there's something that you want to see in more detail. So I want to say thanks to everybody who's been watching and commenting and sharing. I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, feel free to do that, and have a great day.